The morning sun cut through the Riverdale school windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Noah sat in the back corner, his desk a silent island separated from the rest of the room by an invisible tide. He did not look up when the door slammed open or when the hallway noise spilled inside. While other students swapped stickers and argued over homework, Noah kept his head down. He opened his notebook, the paper crisp and blank. His pencil moved across the page with rhythmic precision, sketching shadows that stretched against the glass panes. He focused entirely on the graphite lines, ignoring the shouts and the collective laughter that filled the air. He gripped his pencil until his knuckles turned white, tracing the outline of a dark, empty street. Every movement he made was calculated to remain unnoticed. He did not reach for his eraser, nor did he shift his weight to acknowledge the students passing by his desk. He was a ghost in the back of the room, anchored to his chair, watching the world through the point of a lead pencil. He existed in the space between the light and the dark, completely unseen. The rhythm of the room shifted instantly. Mrs. Clare clapped her hands, and the sound cracked like a whip against the morning quiet. The classroom erupted. Chairs scraped backward, legs hitting floorboards with a dull thud. Students surged toward one another, voices rising in a frantic chorus of names and group assignments. Noah tightened his grip on his desk, his knuckles locking against the wood. He watched the space around him shrink as the room organized into tight, exclusive circles. He flickered his gaze toward a group of four nearby, his eyes searching for an opening, a glance, or a sign of inclusion. No one looked back. The air around him felt thin, the noise of his classmates suddenly distant and muffled. He pulled his notebook closer, shielding his work with his arm. He waited for the hesitation, the moment someone would turn and see him, but the momentum of the room swept past him. He exhaled, his lungs tight. "It is okay, I can work alone," he whispered to the empty air. He forced a smile, but it remained flat, never reaching his eyes, as he turned his focus back to the page. The lunch bell signaled a mass exodus, but Noah lingered in the hallway until the path cleared. He walked to the far edge of the yard, choosing a weathered bench that faced away from the main crowd. He sat down and pulled an apple from his bag. He peeled the skin in one long curling strip, his movements slow and deliberate. Across the field, a group of boys moved in a blur of motion, their shouts and the thud of the football echoing against the fence. Noah watched them. He tracked the ball as it arched through the air, his head turning in rhythm with the play. His chest felt heavy, a physical weight that pinned him to the seat. He stood up, his boots crunching on the gravel, and took a single step toward the center of the field. The noise of the game seemed to roar in his ears, a wall of sound he could not cross. He stopped, his pulse hammered against his throat, and the distance to the other students suddenly seemed like miles. He looked at the grass, his fingers digging into the rough wood of the bench. He sat back down. The apple remained untouched in his hand. He stared at his feet, letting the game continue without him, his body locked in the safety of the perimeter. The yard remained a sea of movement, but Noah focused only on the patch of dirt beneath his boots. He did not hear her approach until the rhythm of the gravel shifted. A shadow fell across his lap, cutting through the glare of the afternoon sun. Noah looked up. A girl stood a few feet away, her gaze fixed on the empty space beside him. She was new. He had not seen her in the halls before. She did not look at the football game or the other students. She looked at the bench. She took one step, then another, and sat down. The wood groaned under the sudden shift in weight. Noah stiffened, his shoulders pulling toward his ears. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. The girl turned her head, her eyes steady. "Hi," she said. The word was soft, but it cut through the hum of the playground like a bell. Noah blinked, his breath hitching in his throat. He had spent the entire morning expecting to be invisible, yet here was someone looking directly at him. His heart hammered a faster rhythm against his ribs. He opened his mouth, but the sound died before it reached his lips. He simply looked at her, stunned by the unexpected presence, a spark of something he had not felt all day. A flicker of possibility widened his eyes as he leaned away from the edge of the bench. Noah stared at the space between them, his fingers still curled tight against the bench. The girl did not look away. She shifted her weight, leaning slightly to get a better view of the notebook resting on his lap. He felt the urge to snap the pages shut, to hide the sketches from view, but his hands stayed still. She pointed to the open page where his pencil had traced the jagged lines of a stormy horizon. "Can I sit here?" she asked again, her voice steady. Noah nodded, the movement jerky and small. He allowed his grip on the notebook to loosen. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the intricate shading of the clouds. "I like your drawings," she said. The sentence hit him with the force of a physical push. Noah's shoulders, long hunched toward his ears, dropped by a fraction of an inch. He took a breath, the air finally reaching the bottom of his lungs. He tilted the book so she could see the next page, a study of light hitting a pane of glass. His posture shifted. He turned his torso toward her, no longer shielding the pages with his arms. For the first time all day, he did not look at the grass. He looked at her, and his lips parted in a tentative, unpracticed smile. The next morning, the school hallway buzzed with a different energy. Posters went up on the brick walls, announcing the regional art competition. Mrs. Clare stood at the front of the classroom, her voice rising above the chatter. She spoke of prizes, of display rules, and of talent waiting to be found. Noah listened, his pencil hovering motionless over his paper. For a fleeting second, his gaze drifted to the colorful flyer pinned to the corkboard. He imagined his own work mounted there, the lines crisp and clear for everyone to see. Then the memory hit him. It was a physical weight, cold and sharp. He felt the familiar sting of jeers from his old school, the sound of laughter echoing in a locker-lined hallway, the feeling of being pointed at for the wrong reasons. He pulled his notebook close to his chest, his knuckles turning white. When Lily leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide with encouragement, she pointed at the flyer. "You must enter this," she insisted. Noah did not look up. He felt his throat tighten. He shook his head slowly, his eyes locked on the scuffed floor tiles. The walls he had only just begun to lower slammed back into place. "People will just laugh," he whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of the room. Lily did not argue. She simply pulled a clean sheet of paper from her bag and pushed it toward him. Noah looked at the blank surface, then back at his own notebook. The fear remained, but the silence of the room began to feel less like a trap and more like a space. He picked up his pencil. He started with a single sharp line, tracing the edge of a rain-drenched rooftop. Then came the windows, reflecting the distorted light of a city hidden behind a downpour. His hand moved with a rhythm he had never allowed himself in public. He added layers of graphite, smudging the edges to create the illusion of fog clinging to wet pavement. He was not just drawing a street, he was building a world. Every stroke was deliberate, a quiet rebellion against the urge to hide. The grey lead turned into depth, shadow, and motion. He forgot the classroom. He forgot the posters. For these moments, the reality of the paper was the only thing that occupied his mind. He worked with a feverish precision, his eyes narrow, his breathing shallow, and synchronized with the scratch of the lead against the grain. The city took shape, vibrant and heavy with the weight of a storm, completely at odds with a boy hunched silently in the corner. The recess bell cut through the classroom like a blade. Noah blinked, the rain-slicked city on his page still vivid in his mind. He gathered his notebook and stood, intending to find a quiet corner to finish the details. He stepped into the hallway, his head down, still lost in the rhythm of his own lines. Then the world tilted. A student running at full speed rounded the corner, slamming into Noah's shoulder with enough force to spin him around. His backpack swung wide. The zipper gave way. Sheets of paper, the city, the rooftops, the storm exploded into the air like white birds. They drifted, fluttered, and settled across the grime-streaked tiles. Noah stumbled, catching himself against the wall. He watched as a group of students surged past, their boots scuffing the sketches, their heels grinding graphite into the floor. A laugh erupted from the crowd, sharp and dismissive, echoing against the lockers. Noah dropped to his knees, his hands reaching out, but the air was thick with shoulders and elbows. He felt the cold concrete beneath his palms. He grabbed for a corner of a page, but a passing student stepped squarely on the center, tearing the paper. He was exposed, his private world scattered and trampled underfoot, while the hallway roared with the sound of everything he feared. Noah pressed his palms into the cold tiles, his fingers shaking as he gathered the torn edges of his work. The laughter in the hallway died down, replaced by a sudden heavy stillness. A pair of polished shoes stopped inches from his hands. A hand reached down, fingers steady and deliberate, and lifted a single graphite-stained sheet from the floor. The paper held the image of the rain-drenched city, its intricate lines undisturbed by the trampling feet. The principal stood motionless, his gaze locked on the page. He turned the paper, tracing the depth of the shadows and the precision of the architecture. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Noah felt the weight of every student's gaze pressing against his back. He rose slowly, knees popping, his hands still trembling as he reached out to retrieve the page. The principal looked up, his eyes searching Noah's face. "Who made this?" the man asked, his voice cutting through the lingering tension of the hallway. Noah swallowed, the sound sharp in the quiet space. He looked at the drawing, then back at the man, his voice low but firm. "I did." The principal nodded. a slow, measured movement that seemed to ground the entire room. This is extraordinary. The assembly hall was a sea of restless movement, the wooden floorboards creaking under the weight of hundreds of students. Noah stood near the back, his arms crossed tightly against his chest, eyes fixed on the stage. He watched the back of the principal's head, the man's presence still looming like a promise. Mrs. Claire ascended the steps to the podium. She tapped the microphone twice, the sharp feedback whine causing the room to ripple with sudden, sharp attention. She held a single sheet of paper in her hand, the same sketch from the hallway. She did not speak immediately. She scanned the rows of faces, her eyes lingering on the back corner where Noah stood. The ambient noise of the room, the whispers, the shuffling feet, the soft coughs collapsed into a singular, suffocating silence. Noah felt his pulse thrumming in his throat. Mrs. Claire leaned into the mic, her voice projecting clearly across the rafters. The winner of this year's art competition is Noah. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the silence shattered. A ripple of sound started at the front, growing into a roar of clapping that filled the hall. Students surged, turning in their seats to look toward the back. Noah stood frozen, the sound hitting him like a physical force, his world tilting on its axis as the school finally recognized the person standing in the shadows. The principal gestured toward the main hallway wall, a space usually reserved for sterile notices and schedules. Students surged forward, a tide of movement that carried Noah along against his will. He stayed at the periphery, his boots making no sound on the polished linoleum. A heavy cloth covered the center of the wall, its edges pinned tight. The principal reached up, his fingers gripping the fabric, and pulled. The material slid downward with a soft, raspy sound, revealing the artwork in its new scale. The drawing of the rain-slicked city had been transformed, blown up into a massive, detailed mural that dominated the hallway. Light from the overhead lamps caught the graphite lines, making the buildings appear as if they were wet to the touch. The crowd fell into a hushed collective intake of breath. Noah leaned against the wall, his own hands tucked firmly into his pockets, observing the reaction. A student near the front reached out, then retracted a finger, afraid to smudge the surface. Heads turned. They were not just looking at the city anymore. They were scanning the room, their eyes searching for the source of the vision. Noah met a classmate's gaze. The boy blinked, then offered a small, tentative nod. The distance that had defined Noah's existence for months began to close, one look at a time. The hallway noise returned to a dull roar, but Noah pulled away. He retreated to the back corner of the classroom, his fingers tracing the familiar grooves of his desk. He kept his head down, watching the dust motes dance in the light. Lily approached his desk, her shadow falling across his notebook, but he did not look up. He focused on the sharp point of his pencil, pressing down until the lead snapped. Outside, the sky shifted. The bright afternoon light drained away, replaced by a low, bruised purple. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes in their frames. Noah stood and walked to the glass, pressing his palm against the cold surface. The trees in the yard swayed violently, their branches clawing at the grey horizon. He watched the clouds thicken, a heavy, suffocating pressure building in the air. His classmates were still talking, their voices loud and oblivious, but Noah stayed silent. He felt the weight of his past, the sting of old labels, and the fear of being exposed again as if it were a storm brewing just behind his ribs. The first heavy drop of rain struck the glass, leaving a long, jagged streak that blurred the world outside into a mess of charcoal and slate. The sky opened wide. Rain did not fall so much as it hammered, turning the world into a blur of grey streaks. Inside, the classroom grew dim, the fluorescent lights flickering as the thunder rumbled deep in the foundation of the building. Noah watched from the window as the schoolyard transformed. The gutters overflowed, spilling torrents of brown water onto the pavement. Within minutes, the asphalt disappeared. The storm surges carved new paths through the dirt, pulling debris and loose gravel into a rising slurry. The playground equipment stood like islands in an expanding, churning pool. Where there had been flat ground, a swamp formed, thick and sluggish. The water climbed steadily, inching up the brick walls of the lower levels. It was no longer a simple afternoon downpour. The pressure of the falling water had overwhelmed the drains, turning the entire yard into a trap. Noah pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the depth increase. The force of the wind pushed the rain sideways, creating a screen that obscured the gate. Below, the water swirled, dark and relentless, claiming the space where students usually gathered for recess. Every object left behind, a stray ball, a discarded lunch bag, was swept away in the rising tide, drifting toward the fence line. Near the rusted iron of the main gate, the landscape had vanished. 3 younger students stood huddled on a small, elevated concrete slab, their faces pale against the driving rain. The water surged around their ankles, then their shins, swirling with debris that clattered against the fence. They tried to take a step toward the building, but the current shoved them back, forcing them to cling to the cold metal bars for stability. One child let out a sharp, jagged cry, but the wind tore the sound away before it could reach the school doors. They were trapped. The water continued to rise, thick and muddy, creeping higher with every heavy pulse of the storm. It washed over their feet, numbing and relentless. Each time they attempted to move, the force of the flow knocked them off balance, sending them stumbling back into the dark pool. They were small, isolated, and visibly trembling as the water level neared their knees. The playground, usually a space for play, had become a churning barrier. They shrieked again, their voices rising in a desperate, frantic chorus that cut through the thunder. The gate was no longer an exit, but a cage, and the water showed no signs of receding. Noah saw them. From the classroom, the distance felt immense, but the cries cut through the thunder. He did not look at his desk. He did not check for permission. He moved. The heavy door groaned as he shoved it open, and the freezing rain hit his face like needles. He ignored the stinging cold. He sprinted across the hallway, his boots thudding against the floor, and burst through the main exit into the chaos of the storm. The wind lashed at his body, but he leaned into it, his eyes fixed on the gate. He reached the edge of the playground, where the asphalt ended and the mud took over. The ground was slick, a treacherous slurry of water and loose earth. He did not hesitate. He stepped off the dry pavement and plunged his legs into the brown, churning current. The water pulled at his weight, thick and heavy, but he forced his stride forward, Every muscle in his legs strained against the resistance. He was no longer the boy who sat in the corner, invisible and quiet. He was a beacon in the deluge. He reached the first child, grabbed a small, trembling hand, and pulled them into his orbit. The transition was complete. He was no longer a victim, but the only line of defense against the rising tide. Noah braced his legs against the shifting slide. He pulled the first child close, shielding them from the brunt of the wind. With a firm grip on their hand, he tested the ground, feeling for solid earth beneath the liquid mud. The current lashed at his knees, trying to drag them toward the drainage grate. He locked his jaw, ignored the burning in his thighs, and pushed forward, one step, then another. He reached the second child, who had collapsed in the rising water, and scooped them up. His lungs worked like bellows. The weight of the children and the drag of the water tested every ounce of his strength. He stumbled, his knee hitting a hidden rock, but he did not fall. He steadied himself, eyes locked on the school door that seemed to recede in the driving rain. A third child gripped his belt, burying their face in his back. He moved with a rhythmic, grinding persistence, fighting the suction of the mud that clawed at his boots. The water swirled higher, reaching his waist, yet he did not break his stride. He dragged them through the churn, inch by agonizing inch, until the concrete of the entrance ramp finally appeared beneath his feet. Noah hauled the last child onto the dry concrete, his chest heaving with every ragged breath. He fell to his hands and knees, water streaming off his body in thick, dark rivulets that pooled around his palm. The silence in the entryway was heavy, broken only by the frantic splashing outside and his own labored gasping. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled, refusing to hold his weight against the sudden exhaustion. He braced his arms against the wall and pushed, his muscles screaming in protest, until he finally locked his knees. He turned back to the threshold. The entire school staff stood in the hallway, pressed against the glass doors. They were motionless. Teachers and students alike stared at him, their expressions shifting from alarm to a stunned, quiet recognition. Noah stood there, dripping, his hair plastered to his forehead, his hands raw and shaking. He did not look for applause. He simply wiped the water from his eyes and looked down at the children huddled safely behind him. The wall of silence broke. A teacher stepped forward, then another, their faces pale as they finally saw the boy who had been standing in the corner of every room, now revealed as the one who held the line. Noah walked back into the classroom, his sodden boots leaving dark, rhythmic prints across the floor tiles. The radiator hissed, a sharp sound in the sudden quiet of the room. He reached his desk and pulled out the chair, the wood scraping harshly against the floor. He sat, his limbs heavy, water still dripping from his hair, onto the wooden surface of the desk. The other students stood in a loose circle, their eyes tracing the puddles around his feet. One student stepped forward, hands clasped, and broke the stillness. Why were you always alone? Noah did not look up immediately. He stared at the grain of the wood on his desk, his fingers tracing a deep scratch. He took a slow breath, the air in the room feeling dense and pressurized. At my old school, they made fun of me, he said. His voice was steady, stripped of its usual tremor. I thought it would be the same here. The classroom fell silent. It was not the empty silence of before. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Students looked down at their own hands, then back at Noah, the air thick with the sudden, sharp realization of the space he had been forced to occupy. The stillness stretched, vibrating with the sudden weight of the truth. A girl in the front row looked down, her fingers picking at the edge of her book, then slowly uncurled her hands and flattened them against the desk. Beside her, a boy shifted his weight, his gaze darting from the floor to the back corner where Noah sat. The realization moved through the room like a physical current. They were not looking at a mystery anymore. They were looking at a person who had spent months standing in the shadow of their own disregard. One by one, the students stopped avoiding his eyes. The tension in their shoulders dropped. A deep collective breath seemed to pass through the classroom, clearing the air of the previous distance. They looked at Noah, then at each other, the unspoken understanding passing between them. There were no more whispers. The barrier that had defined the room since the start of the term dissolved. They saw the desk, the pencil, and the boy, and for the first time, they recognized the space he occupied as his own rightful place among them. The cold distance of the corner was gone, replaced by a quiet, shared intent. The following week, the atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted. Noah no longer headed for the isolated bench at the edge of the yard. Instead, he walked directly toward the center table where the other students were gathered. He pulled out a chair, and there was no hesitation, no sideways glance. He sat down and placed his sketchbook on the table's surface. A group of students leaned in, their heads close to his. Noah turned the pages, showing the detailed lines of his work. He laughed at a comment from the girl beside him, his voice clear and resonant. Across the room, the corner desk sat empty, a silent testament to the change. There were no more solitary lunches, no more watching from the sidelines. Noah pointed to a sketch, his hand steady and confident, and the surrounding students nodded, their focus entirely on the art and the person who created it. He belonged. He shared his sketches, he engaged in the conversation, and for the first time, every person at the table saw him. He was no longer a shadow on the periphery. He was in the center, and he was finally truly seen.